Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with another Inside the Scope edition where I break down either a part of hip hop, a subgenre, or a specific piece of work. And today I'll be covering one of the best works in hip hop, Notorious B.I.G.'s debut album, Ready to Die. One of the albums that you can't tell the story of hip hop without. Now, this album released in 1994. Like I said, it was Biggie's first solo project. So, like I said, it took his whole life to get this album together. We all know the story of him being on the streets and him being heavy in the streets, and then him being found through Bad Boy Records, him being able to leave that life behind and to provide for his family through hip hop. And he talked about in this album about how hip hop influenced him and what hip hop meant to him. And it was a master class in a debut album and a master class in hip hop in itself. Like I said, you can't tell the story of hip hop without this album. One of the most pivotal albums in hip hop history, being released in 1994. Now, interesting fact, researching this album that I didn't know about, that shocked me and surprised me as much as successful as this album was. It only shipped 57,000 copies in its first week of releasing. Now, of course, it went on to sell 6 million records, and so go 6 times platinum, but it only shipped 57,000 records, and it didn't say why. And it's interesting to see why, because he had a lot of buzz behind him. But like I said, social media wasn't out back then. They didn't have all these different outlets covering hip hop. Hip hop was in its infancy, so to speak. It only had been around for about 20 plus years at that time. So maybe the promotion, but him being a Bad Boy Records, you think the promotion would be there. But to only ship 57,000 records in the first week was insane for me just to think about. But there's been artists like Nas's Illmatic and Criss Cross's first album that didn't do well in the first week, but went on to be several times platinum because people either caught on later, later for whatever reasons. But eventually people found the music and it became very successful. But that's very interesting for Biggie's solo album, which is one of the top, 5 or 10 hip hop albums of all time, to only sell that amount in the first week was very interesting to see. But like I said, this album was a masterclass in hip hop music, 17 tracks. And the only feature, another interesting fact, the only feature on this whole album from a rapper that was actually rapping on the album was Method Man. And he was on the song The What, which Method Man snapped on that song. This was during his Wu-Tang years when, Wu-Tang didn't miss. And they never did miss on any albums or songs. But it was interesting that he only picked Method Man during this time to be the only feature on the album, rap feature as well. Other people were singing and stuff like that, but the only feature was Method Man. So, but I love the production on this album. It was very cohesive. None of the songs sound like they didn't fit together. It seemed like one of those albums, like back in the days, they worked with only a certain amount of producers, so they gave you that same sound, that crisp sound that they always put out. You had a Easy Mo B, Blues Brothers, Diddy, DJ Premier, Lord Finesse, who produced on the album. But for some reason, you had multiple producers on this album, but the producers seemed like they were in collusion. It was like collusion almost, in a good way. It seemed like they were on the same page as production goes. Not like I said, all the songs sounded very in the same ballpark. It didn't sound like the same, but it gave that same vibe and that same feeling. And that what made that album so great was it just sounded so nice. Sounded so like they actually put time into it and they actually thought it out. And there wasn't anything like they was trying to make something for the radio or trying to make a hit there. And I know that Biggie didn't like the sample for Juicy at first, but once they finalized it, he liked the song and it became a hit. And Juicy's one of those songs, one of the greatest hip hop songs of all time. One of the songs, like I said, you can't tell the story of hip hop without that song. It expressed about his love for hip hop and what he was trying to do for his family and how he had to hustle to eat and how he had to do these different things and what he wanted to be, the greatness of B.I.G. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 24, so he was only able to put out 3 albums if you can count the double disc for the second album. but never, but essentially he only had 2 albums. But um, the work that he put out when he was here was great, and it would have been interesting to see if he lived longer what his catalog would have looked without it. But most people still put Biggie in their top 10, regardless if he only put out 2 albums. Tupac put out a lot more albums, and he died around the same time. But his work ethic, they said, was always better than Biggie's. But Biggie was able to party and still put out this high quality. So it would have been very exciting to see him to put out more music and have a catalog. But unfortunately, we won't be able to get to see that. But back to the album, one of my favorite um, songs on the track was Big Papa. Now, this song was a very laid back track, but the flow was timeless. The production was right. It was just a perfect marriage between production and lyrics. And it was a masterclass in lyricism. And like I said, Biggie, this song was probably a more radio friendly song, but it's very underrated lyric wise, I think, because the the chorus was so good and so catchy and it seemed so poppy, but the flow was just right. And the way he put words together, he showed you why he was such a great lyricist. And he wasn't just about the flash and the grandeur and the things like that, and the dog and pony show and things like that, and smoke and mirrors. He wasn't that. He gave you the lyrics the way he's seen them, and he gave you his view of the world from his eyes, and the way he could paint a picture. And most people don't realize being a hip hop artist is being an artist in its true essence, being able to paint a picture, to see things, to see somebody go through struggle, and to be able to paint that picture in so vividly and to put it in lyrics is very difficult to do. And it's a very difficult skill, and it's an unappreciated skill in hip hop. But emceeing is a part of that element of hip hop that should be taken seriously. And there are not a lot of MCs anymore. It's a lot of rappers, but there are not a lot of MCs. And Biggie was a great MC and a great lyricist as well, a poet, so to speak. But Juicy, like I said, told that story of rags to riches. Now, Biggie has been compared to Rick Ross just from his style and the story of rags to riches, and how Biggie used to wear the Coogis, and Rick Ross has that fashion sense as well, and just to have this boss type mentality. Now, Biggie always told a story of trying to be a boss. He named himself Frank White, always called himself the Don. Rick Ross has those same elements and that same persona and that same swag, and that's how why most people compare a Biggie to Rick Ross, because of those things of rags to riches type story, and being a boss now and controlling your own destiny, and putting other people on, and that's what they prided their music in. And then also on this album had the Two Shotcha, which was perceived as a Tupac diss. Now, people from Bad Boy and other people close to that song said that Biggie recorded that song before Tupac was shot the first time. But Tupac saw it as a diss, and he came back with Hit 'Em Up, and it became this whole East Coast West Coast beef, and it started the whole beef. But nevertheless, this album is one of the best albums of all time. I posted a survey on my page of what is the greatest hip hop debut album in history, that on the list that I provided, and I believe I provided Nas's Illmatic and a couple of other albums. So when you have a time, fill out that survey. And then until next time, I'll see you next time.